the last couple of weeks, I know very well that the efforts that Joe Manchin and I engaged in are efforts that many, maybe most of the people in this room disagree with. And I understand that. I get that. But I do appreciate the fact that you're willing to hear me out. And I just appreciate being able to explain why I did what I did. And my hope is that we can agree to disagree on this and move on to the many, many areas in which we agree. But I should start by pointing out that I'm a gun owner. I have a lifetime rating with the NRA. The rating is A. And the Second Amendment has always been and continues to be very important to me. So I'm not going to, really, I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right and you're wrong. But I do want you to understand why I did what I did. And there are a few reasons. One is the underlying language in the bill that the Democrats put on the floor was language I couldn't support. It went too far in a variety of ways. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to support that. But I did think there were some constructive things that we could do. So let me just walk through quickly, because there were a lot of inaccuracies about the bill that Joe Manchin and I ended up introducing. Basically, there's three parts the way I think of it, three segments of this bill. One is it would have improved the state's participation in the existing background check system. A second thing that it would do is it would expand background checks for commercial purchases at gun shows and over the internet. And the third category is a whole raft of provisions that would allow law-abiding citizens to better enjoy and exercise the Second Amendment rights by getting rid of restrictions that we live with today. As far as the improving the state's participation, I should point out, we weren't creating a new system. We weren't suggesting any new criteria by which people who were adjudicated to be mentally unfit, there wouldn't be any new categories. It was just a matter of encouraging states to participate in the existing system that we have. And a lot of folks have said, you know, that wouldn't have prevented the Newtown massacre. That's absolutely true. It would not have. But it might have made a difference in the Virginia Tech incident, because as you may know, the shooter in that case had already been adjudicated by the government of Virginia as dangerously mentally unstable and a threat. But they never provided that system that information, that data, to the background check system. So when this guy went to buy weapons, they ran a background check, and he came through with flying colors, and he left the store heavily armed. Now, if he had been turned down at that point, we don't know what would have happened. He might have gotten the gun somewhere else, of course. But something else might have happened as well. Some other event might have intervened. He might have gotten help. Who knows? But that's the first part. The more controversial part, I think, was expanding background checks to gun shows. And I understand that, but I do want to stress, this is a measure that I voted for in 1999. And so did a big majority of House Republicans. And the NRA endorsed it. It's meant to do just one thing, and that is to make it harder for two classes of people who have no legal right to have a gun. That is, criminals who forfeited their right, and dangerously mentally ill people who we've agreed as a society shouldn't be armed. It's meant to make that a little harder for them to obtain those weapons. Now, I understand a determined criminal will always be able to find a way to get a weapon, but forcing him to have an accomplice and making it a little bit more difficult, I thought made some sense. And one of the things that I think is really important is to think about the constitutional component of this. And you know, I don't hold myself out as a great constitutional scholar. I'm not even a lawyer. But there's somebody who I have enormous respect for, is Antonin Scalia. He's a great conservative. He's a great constitutional scholar. And he wrote a great decision, the Heller decision, which many of you probably know, which finally put to rest a debate that had been going on in this country for a long time. And the debate was about whether the Second Amendment is a collective right that belongs to states and is conditioned upon being a member of a militia, or, in contrast, is it an individual right that belongs to individual Americans? The conservative majority of the Supreme Court, led by Antonin Scalia, came to the correct conclusion, in my view, that's an individual right. It belongs to individuals, and it's not contingent on any participation in a militia. In that decision, Justice Scalia also specified, he chose to write, he didn't have to, but he chose to write that any laws that laws restricting the purchase of firearms by people who were not legally entitled to it, who did not deserve to enjoy Second Amendment rights. Those such laws were perfectly constitutional. That was Justice Scalia. Another concern that I think is an understandable concern that people raise is whether this could lead to a gun registry. And I will tell you, there is no good reason to have a gun registry, and I will fight any effort to create a gun registry that might ever. And Joe Manchin and I totally agreed on this, and we felt so strongly about it that we put into the bill, and you can read it. Our bill was available for a week before the vote occurred. We specified that it would be a felony criminal crime if any federal employee whatsoever so much as began to compile data for the purpose of creating a registry, and that felony would be subject to 15 years in prison. I think that's a pretty tough measure to prevent any movement in the direction of a registry. The last thing I want to point out is that I was able to insist on a number of concessions that my Democratic friends did not want to agree to, but they did in this bill. Concessions that would allow law-abiding gun owners to, as I say, better exercise, more freely exercise their Second Amendment rights. For instance, we have a provision that would secure interstate travel. You may be familiar with this. If you load up a shotgun in your vehicle perfectly in accordance with Pennsylvania law, but then drive through several states, and we have neighboring states that are not so friendly to gun owners, you will not be in compliance. You may not be in compliance with their laws, and people have been harassed and subject to arrest even because they don't meet the criteria, the regulatory regime in those other states. We take care of that by making it clear that a state couldn't impose that on people. We said that if you have a concealed carry permit, you shouldn't be required to go through another background check. You've already gone through one, and so a concealed carry permit would be deemed adequate ID for buying a firearm without another background check. We allowed people, in our legislation, people would be allowed to buy a handgun out of state. That's currently forbidden. There's no reason for that to be forbidden. We expanded people's freedom to do that. And I was surprised to discover that active duty military personnel, a Pennsylvanian who gets assigned to Fort Dix, is not allowed, by virtue of serving this country in uniform and being stationed in another state, you become precluded under existing law from buying a weapon in your home state. That makes no sense. We wiped that out. That was repealed in our bill. So I think we all know how this all turned out. My friends at the NRA opposed this. Other groups opposed it. There were some pro-Second Amendment groups that supported it. But in the end, clearly times have changed since 1999. And I was not able to persuade enough of my colleagues. We had the vote on Wednesday. I lost. I get that. This issue, I think, is probably resolved for now. And I want you to know that I intend to turn my attention to my usual wheelhouse. I'm going to resume my focus. I'm going to resume my focus on pushing back a government that is the main reason we have a miserable economy today. And pushing back on excessive regulation that is clearly choking off economic growth and trying to restore some common sense fiscal discipline so that we can get on a sustainable fiscal path.